Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Financial Transformation Live. My name's Hannah Munro, and I'm here to talk to you today about how to ensure that your next financial transformation project is successful. So let's get started. So for those of you who haven't joined before, we do these sessions every month, and it's all about helping you maximize your success and ensuring that you learn from some mistakes that we've made over the years, because the best way to learn is from mistakes, and even better if it's other people's. So in my role, I'm managing director of itas, but fundamentally I want to share some of the things that we've implemented in terms of how we implement as a financial transformation consultancy, how we implement Sage technologies and ensure the success. So I'm going to give you a quick refresher of the change cycle. I always think that is so critical to the success of any transformational technology implementation project. We're going to talk about sort of some pre-implementation activities and things to think about as you go through each stage of the project. I'll talk you through what the stages should look like for success and where we've said we've seen success and common mistakes to avoid as we go through. So big agenda, but if you're wondering why I'm qualified to do this, so I've been implementing Sage technology projects and helping with financial transformation consultancy projects for I think it's now about 15 years. I've lost track. I've been doing it for that long. And I'm really lucky to work with an incredible team of business analysts, technology implementers. And so a lot of the information I'm sharing here is all about the best practice that we're constantly applying. So every project we work on, we dig into how could it have been better? Where were the things that came up? How can we avoid that happening ever again? So our rule of thumb here at itas is we never want to make the same mistake twice. And that's constantly what we're striving to do. And it's why we've got an amazing reputation and a huge number of case studies. So if you want to see some of the success stories we have, of course, they're on our website, www.itassolutions.co.uk. Okay, so let's get into the thick of things. So last time, for those of you that missed the last session, please dial back on. We talked all about how to present your business case to your audience and get buy-in for that case. And on to today's session. So this is one of my favorite theorems that I always talk about with clients. And it's an oldie but a goodie. And what's interesting is that historically it was a linear process. And Kotter, and anyone that's done any kind of like executive training will know who Kotter is and the change cycle. But for those perhaps that may have heard it but not spent a lot of time on it, it's basically about the theory of how we embed change within organizations. And so Kotter traditionally had a very linear change process, but what's interesting is in later years he's actually changed it into more of a circular piece. If we think about the opportunity for change, how do we successfully lead change, and what are the stages that we need to consider? So and I always think this is critical when you're going into a transformation project, to have this at the back of your mind and thinking, have I done that, and am I really thinking about how we do this? So the first thing is you need to make sure that you have created a sense of urgency and you have got agreement or a consensus across the organization that this needs to happen. So we need to create a sense of like, this needs to happen and this needs to happen now, and this is why. So once we've created that sort of sense of urgency, we build the coalition. So the coalition is the guiding group. So who is going to help us decide on the changes? Who is going to help us guide us down this route? Have we got the right team to make decisions about what that change should look like and how it should go? So that's your second step as leader. In terms of thinking through, and in terms of being clear, I think one of the things that we need to do as finance leaders is really think clearly about the vision. So what is and make sure we've communicated that vision well. So have we set out exactly how we see the picture looking in 2 to 3 years once we've gone through this change management program? And have we communicated that to the team, and not just our finance team, but our wider stakeholders? Okay. We need to enlist the army and change cannot happen within an organization if there's one person driving it. And I think we all know that. If you listen if you see some of the stats, and we are incredibly lucky in terms of our success rate on projects, and helps it work with some amazing technology with Sage, but fundamentally, so many projects fail because they haven't got these things, and particularly, I believe, they haven't enlisted the right people driving the project, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. Enable, so remove barriers, get rid of things that are stopping people from investing in that change process. Generate wins. I talk about this all the time, but it's even in Kotter's theorem, guys. So generate those short-term wins, drive forwards the impact and the value, and get people feeling the power of change and transformation. It's something I'm really passionate about. How do we create those wins? How do we get people feeling the success, not just doing? And then sustain the acceleration. So again, we'll talk about how you can build acceleration and pace and momentum within your transformation project, and make the change happen. And then you'll notice it goes back. So, and then why do we need to continue? Okay, so what's next? And each time round of this cycle, it should become easier and easier because you've got the right team in place. They understand how to do change. They understand the value of change, and then it almost becomes I actually think it should be a spiral versus a circle. But hey, I'm sure Kotter knows best. So what do we mean? So how does that look? How do we start to think about these principles in terms of financial systems implementation? So the first thing is getting your team on board. So whether you're a team of 2 or 3, whether you're a team of 40, you need to get your team on board, and you need to make sure you've clearly articulated the why, because there is going to be things as you go through the change that are going to be like, you're going to feel resistance. Now, that could be resistance from people. It could be resistance from processes. There may be things you need to work around. So you need to give them that almost like that resistance, that ability to resist the pushback. And that all comes from your why. If you've articulated that well, then you're great. But also, in order for you to make good decisions, and people sometimes forget this, is in order for you to make good decisions as you go through this process, you need to establish your priorities. And you might have lots of things that you want to achieve with your project. You might want to improve month end, speed up reporting, reduce headcount, whatever it is, but you need to be clear on what is the priority, because there may be conflicting priorities. It might be reducing getting better reporting means entering more information, which again, you've got to think about how does that impact? How important is budget? So if I'm thinking about this ahead of time, have you agreed some kind of flex in the budget? Are you gonna, if something can't be done or you need more time, what's your flexibility and prioritization around budgets and things as well? So thinking all of that through as a team before you go into the project is much better than having those conversations when you're mid-project, right? Be really clear. This is the things we need to achieve. This is the boundaries in which you as a team can work. So we must have these, we must hit these requirements. We must be able to do this, this, and this. And here is the budget limitation, or if you need more budget, this is what we're going to need to see. But we want to minimize this as we go through. Yeah. And getting the team on board with that, almost setting out your stand as a leader about this is kind of the boundaries. And also, I must have forgot to add this into this one, making sure you're dealing with objections up front, right? Don't get mid-project and have someone go, well, I thought this was going to happen, but I didn't want to say. No, you get all of that feedback and that viewpoint out ahead of time. If you've got some individuals that are particularly negative about the change for whatever reason, deal with them individually. There's lots of studies around groupthink, and I think I've covered it once on the podcast, but fundamentally, people like to, we're engineered to think as a group. Most people will align with other people. It's like the experiment where they go up in the elevator and everybody turns around apart from one person, and then eventually he'll turn around the wrong way for the elevator just because he wants to feel part of the team and he's wondering what he's missing. So and the reason I talk about that is because when you're trying to get a team on board and build a positive consensus around the direction and get people motivated. If you've got individuals that are maybe in the background chipping away with negative comments or are not on board with this, you need to address that really quickly. And you need to obviously listen to them, take the feedback on board, because sometimes it's useful. It's good feedback and you need to think about it, and or say, this is why I don't feel like this is applicable. So make sure you get through and get on board with that team. So one of the things I often see is that people don't kind of think about projects in the same way that I or we at itas do. So, and I don't think anything we're doing is rocket science, but we have clearly defined phases. So when you're going into an implementation project, particularly with technology, so a lot of this is geared toward technology because that's a key part of what we do. It's not all we do, but it's a key part. So thinking about, so your planning phase. So make sure that you have one is the first thing. Make sure you think about what we're going, have we got the right resources? Have they got capacity? And all of that, and that you've planned out dates and schedules. Now, you can flex as you go through, but you need to have a top level plan and you need to have thought through how you're going to deliver this, because if you don't, then once you get into it, then it's harder to reorientate or redirect. The second piece is scoping. So scoping is another key area where I feel like people don't give it the attention it deserves. And I'll talk about what's made up of that. Concept. I am a big believer in proof of concept phases. I think it's really important because it helps you maximize your training and testing phases. You want all of the obvious process issues and feedback to come out. Anything big should come out at the concept stage when you've got your super admins, you've not spent a huge amount of resource on telling people how things are going to work, only to reverse it. There is nothing worse, particularly if you have some individuals that don't like change in the first place, to then give them a process to say 5 minutes later, oh no, we're going to do that differently now. So concept phase is you get buy-in again. It's kind of reboosting that resilience to the negativity for change. And you can make sure that you've understood the requirements, that it's going to deliver what it needs. And if not, you have time to change it, right? So that's what that concept phase is. Training and testing, obvious, but we'll talk about some things you need to think about, and data migration and go live. Okay. So these are in my eyes, the key stages of successful project, and you need to think about each one of them as you go into them. So plannings and timings. So phase. And you guys have heard this probably so many times, but it works and it has impact, and it gives you the ability to get that sense of achievement, be able to outline to your key, that your key stakeholders, your board, your executive committees, your wider executive team. This is how we are going, this is what we're going to achieve by when, and these are the phases. So we're going to start this phase here, and when we get to the end of it, this is what we're going to have to achieve. It also gives your team the opportunity to take a break. You get into it, you have a particularly challenging phase, you shift the next one out by a month. You're not in the midst of constant chaos, right? And change shouldn't be chaos, but it is intense sometimes, particularly around go lives. So making sure that you're really thinking through how you can cut things down and do things in small chunks versus trying to run everything at once. It's a bit like running a marathon. Don't go and run a marathon. Perhaps do a 10K or a half marathon first, right? Make sure that you've figured out the optimum order to do your phases. So things you need to consider is what is going to, and I always like to prioritize based on obviously dependencies. So is there an order that it has to go in order for this to work? But also impact. So what is going to make the biggest difference in terms of value to the organization? Cost. Is there one area that's more expensive or is going to deliver a better ROI? So can we do that first? But also effort. So, are there certain phases that are going to be harder than others? And let's build our change resilience and our change capabilities before we get to that really hard stage. Yeah. So an example could be if you've got multiple entities you're looking to shift onto a new system, pick a smaller entity and start building that capability and capacity on those smaller entities first. And there are caveats around that in terms of make sure that there's enough complexity to be able to test and make sure that the config is correct. But fundamentally, you might want to go live with the first one first. So, okay. So the other thing I'm just going to say, and I have this conversation a lot, is that year end isn't your only option for go live. So a lot of people they like going live with finance systems at year end because it's a nice clean cutoff, but it's also incredibly stressful. So do think about, can you pick up at a quarter end versus a year end? And that's something to consider. And resource, thinking through holidays and, who's booked holidays, when are they thinking of booking holidays? Because the problem with holidays is not that a key person's off, it's that the other people in the team have to cover their job, right? Because unfortunately, work doesn't stop when we go on holiday. It either waits for us or it gets reallocated. So thinking about what, particular times. And there are some phases where different people being off at different times aren't as impactful. That, like, for instance, training is a challenge, right? Because, and because you need all of the people in one place at one time. And if everyone's trying to catch up with the fact because they've been away for 3 weeks, they're not going to have time to really focus on the training. So thinking about what's happening through the year, is the people going on maternity? Is there maybe there's some individuals that are maybe leaving the organization? And I've got a few thoughts on that. So that's something we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, just thinking about the resource. That being said, there's normally never a perfect time, right? So it's more about what is the best opportunity. And sometimes you do have to bite the bullet and get change in, because then that creates capacity. So it is sometimes about acknowledging the fact that this is going to be a lot of work with your team, and saying, but it's only going to be for this period. And when we get out of it, this is what we're going to have. So depending on your relationship with your team, the nature of the team that you're working with, sometimes that can be a conversation to deal with. And really think through. I think this point is you have to get the buy-in in terms of when this is going to happen, and think through as many things as you can in terms of resource, because again, you need your team to have the time to do this change. So scope. So what I've noticed is, and one of the things that's really interesting, I think, in finance at the moment, is that historically finance people will go into a role and stay there for 5+ years, right? But there wasn't as much movement in either senior, but also sort of mid to lower level roles, right? The challenge I think a lot of businesses are seeing is that with COVID, with some changes to the employment market, is that there's a lot more movement in roles. Yeah. I always see change as an amazing opportunity. And if you're in a role and you've got a change project coming up, take advantage of it, because there is, if you can deliver a change project successfully on your CV, that's a skill a lot of employers are looking for. So the first thing is having that conversation. That's a great conversation to have with your team. It's like, I hope you never leave me, but we have this. But secondly, if you have people that are going to be leaving and you know about it, then you need to think about, how can I get all of that knowledge that's in their brain out in order before they go. And sometimes that can mean pulling the scoping phase forwards. Because a lot of people, what they'll say is, we're going to hire their replacement, and then we're going to let that replacement start to make decisions around how it's going to be. And yes, there's an advantage to that. The ideal scenario is we have both the previous person and the new person involved. But at the same time, you need that historical knowledge. So we've had conversations in the past. We've said to people, well, can we get some crossover? Can we do the scoping in the crossover? Because all of the questions we're asking is an amazing onboarding process for that new person. Yep. And they get feedback into the process, but whilst we still have that historical knowledge through. So yeah, see, there is always a pro and a con, and I've seen it work both ways. It's not that it's a wrong to wait for the new person to come in, because they'll have very definite ideas, but you also should see if you can take advantage of that previous person leaving. So that's one thing that I've seen recently in terms of projects where, the scope phase has been really successful. We've had that lovely crossover of people. So I just thought I'd shout that out. So scope, be prepared. So many people go into scope and they haven't taken the opportunity to think through what they want to get out at a detailed level with their scoping. Now, obviously as consultants, you hope that your consultants are going to pull it all out of you anyway. Yeah. But if you perhaps don't have that strong consultant set, then you might need to help them get you to where you need to be. So what can you do as a finance team to ensure that the scoping is, as an amazing experience for both you, but also that you're giving the consultant what they need to do a good job? So the first thing is thinking about how you can give them better insight into how your business operates. I had an amazing customer that came to me with all of their use cases documented out because they had the internal process documents. I was like, wow, love you guys. Let's crack on. So they came to me with, these are our billing use cases. This is how we do rev rec. This is how we do this. And it was fantastic. They really understood that. So making sure that you've thought about different scenarios and use cases, and your team have just started brain dumping all of that stuff into like a spreadsheet as they're working. Because when a consultant comes to you and goes, so tell me about the different scenarios you have around this, you'll think of the ones that you hit a lot, but what you might not think about is the really tricky ones that come up and that cause a lot of problems. So getting the team to think through what is the information we need to give the consultants, and just kind of keeping a running brain dump while they're doing their day jobs is really important. Making sure that you, where possible, find the time to invest in understanding what you could do. Because obviously it's not just about taking your existing processes and dumping them in a new system, but with any new system, if you know what its capabilities are, you can help sort of feed into that process of really getting the most out of the solution. So I always recommend, so we, as part of Sage in Tax, they've got a really great sort of fundamentals course that we give or encourage our customers to do pre-scope, obviously definitely pre-training, but pre-scope's even better because it gets them understanding the basics of the software. It gets them understanding the terminology like dimensions. So sorts of things that you could look at is you could ask for the demos. If you've done a demo, obviously you had a demo solution, get everybody to watch it. Let them see the ooh and the ah moments that, made you make the decision to move forwards with the solution. But also there might be questions that you've asked or scenarios you put forwards that you might just need to bring up and remember. So that's one way. Asking if there's any videos or almost like on-demand training or help guides that the team can spend a little time getting to know. Again, just familiarizing yourself with your software is really valuable to make sure that you get more out of that. Collecting documentation. So great things to bring to the table are, what are the different documents you produce at the system currently, and how do you want them changed? Have you had that discussion? So, have you spoken to your credit control team and say, do you want certain things on the invoice, or, branding team, if there's anything that they want to change because you've got this opportunity? So that's documents. Second thing is processes. So if you've got documented processes, collect them, put them into a place and procedures, and give them to your consultants ahead of time. Don't throw them at the day because they're going to be too busy talking with you and taking notes to actually do it. So send all of that stuff through before. And one of my things, and I'm actually going to do a session specifically on this, but consult with your stakeholders about reporting. So many, because I bet you there'll be a couple of people in your organization that have been would really see value in such reporting, but they've just not felt able to ask for it or felt like this was the right time, and they're going to throw that at you once you get your new system in. But you need to know now so you can design the data architecture. So really thinking that through is important. So making sure that you've really understood what your stakeholders need in terms of reporting, and you can think strategic, operational, and control/process, and making sure you're having those conversations. And then ensuring strategic alignment. So making sure you have both an operational, transactional people in the room, the people that are doing the day job, but also that you as finance leader, or the senior team are feeding into that to make sure that functionality wise, requirements wise, that you're giving it that strategic alignment. And last but not least is, I always advise people to and how you have this conversation with your team is completely up to you, but really think about using this as an opportunity to think big, right? Not just replicating what you're doing in your current system, but is this an opportunity to reimagine how you do finance? And I think one of the questions, and I'm sure I had this on the podcast or something, but the question is not now, can it do it? Yeah. There's normally an answer for yes, right? The question is, how much is it going to cost me and how complex is it to do? And that's a different conversation. But don't be afraid to ask that, can it do this, right? Could we find a better way to do this? And are we thinking big enough as a team in terms of the change that we're implementing? So that's something I would really encourage you to have a conversation with your teams prior to scope. Say, guys, we have this opportunity. Let's make the most of it. Let's rethink some of the processes. It might be that we go through and go, that's too big a change, but let's scope with the big picture, and then we can close the requirements down once we've got there. So just a little bit of advice for those looking at that scoping piece. Proof of concept. So this is something that we've implemented with some actually really amazing success within itas. And it's all about having that pre-stage prior to training and testing. Because once you get into training and testing, and yes, you can layer it, and some people decide they want to have a different way. But once you start training people, your processes should be fairly set in terms of how you're going to use the system. What you don't want to do is train people and have to change and retrain. It's not great for their mental view of what's going on, and it can damage buy-in and motivation, all those kind of things. But it's also costly for you as a project. So, and you can't use that time elsewhere, or it costs you more money than you expected because you've had to redo something. And it's something we've learned because we work on fixed price. So we really try to optimize the value and where we spend time. And I think it's been one of the biggest successes that we've seen. So making sure at the proof of concept stage that you're walking through all of your key use cases, all your processes, but also your reporting. And I put that in there. Don't forget your reporting. It's the same with scope. Don't forget your reporting. Everyone focuses so much on process and not enough on what they're going to get out of it at the end. Think in different use cases. So make sure you work through all of your different scenarios and use cases for the concept phase. And make sure you have the right people in the room. So those that are going to be looking at it strategically and consuming the information, but also those that are doing the day job, right? Because if the people that are doing the day, you need a nominated person that can say, yeah, we can operate using this system. And you need to make sure you've got the right people in the room. Make sure that if somebody's sitting there and you can see a little puzzled look on their face, ask the question. Have you, is there something here that's worrying you? Is it concerning you? Tell me what you're thinking, because you want to get all of your concerns, objections out at this stage. And you've chosen these people to be in this proof of concept stage because you trust them to give you the right viewpoint, and they've got a knowledge that you need to access. So use it. Don't just look for agreement. Look for the ones where they're going, I'm not sure how that's going to work for the team, right? And you want to get it all out. And finally, make sure you step back and review that against the objectives. Really, really important. Okay. Proof of concept stage done. We're happy with the solution. We deliver the requirements, and then we need to train. So what makes great training? So firstly, have an agenda. You must make sure you know what you're covering each training session, and that you have the right people in the room. Again, you're noticing a theme here. And make sure people understand the value of training. Yeah, like on-demand training is great, and we not very often will record training. Make sure you have that turned on as standard. But what is even more important is having that engagement, because if you're doing it live, you can see people's levels of understanding, and you can figure out maybe I just need to recap that, or I'm going to go back to that, or explain it a different way and things. So you don't get that when people watch it on demand. It's obviously on demand's great for building, like you've got people in different time zones, but try and think through how you're going to deliver it and make sure that people are able to focus. And that's a good point. So time zones, make sure wherever possible, it isn't 9 o'clock at night, because nobody takes in a huge amount of information after a long day of work. So really try and think about how you can optimize training for success. Are they able to engage? Set some ground rules. The amount of times we have people come into training and they're like different people darting out because they've got something to do or it's close to month end. Pick your times and make sure that people aren't on their emails. They're not doing a billion other things. Make sure nobody's sending reports to people to check and review and reconcile. Create that safe space to do training and to get value out of that training, because it is important. And they're not just learning the steps of entering it. They're almost in their heads. They should be thinking through, okay, well, that means that what does that mean for this person or this role? Or, they're processing the change as they are training. And the more comfortable you get them with the new way of working, the less resistance you are going to have. So training, please don't underestimate the value of that and that it's delivered and done well. Wherever possible, you want it to be practical. So I have, ongoing conversation. I like our training to be as practical as possible. I like people to be getting into the system and doing it and applying what they've learned. I'm not a big fan of let me watch a mouse move around a screen for hours on end. That nobody really takes things in. So, and again, a lot of my guys have been on the trainer training, and they talk a lot about different modes of processing information. Some people like to read, write, talk, do. Lots of people do, but activities as general rule, people learn more by doing than they do anything else than watching and listening. So if I could get you to do an exercise now, I would, and maybe that's some feedback I should take on board for these sessions as well. Make sure that the group sizes are small enough, and think through the teams. If you've got a big team, just think through who you've got in what set of training. Okay. So general rule, always train super users first. Give them their own session. They tend to work faster in most instances, not always, but they tend to be more technically capable. But make sure they sit in and are there then there to support and answer questions and help with exercises for those follow-up sessions as well, if you're going to take a super user approach. I genuinely recommend it. I think super users are valued. I also don't believe that super users should deliver training in most instances, because it's harder, and unless you're doing very simple processes, very often they don't have, they can't gain 5 years of knowledge after one training session and a bit of playing around the system. That's just the reality. What I do like is when we train super users, those super users then come to the training sessions with the rest of the users and then support and help those users in the exercises, activities, and the testing afterwards. There we have seen some real success in terms of really embedding the knowledge, and they get more chances to really build it because they'll take away something different from that second set of training. And they're there to sort of keep an eye on who's struggling, maybe make a mental note of who they should be coaching after the session or who might need a bit more support as you go into testing as well. Follow-up materials. So one thing that is great for super users to do is to build the training materials for people to have as they go forward. So that could be help guides, that could be videos of core tasks and processes, documenting the processes, because all of that embeds this knowledge of the system and how you're going to use it moving forwards. And we do it as training exercises internally. So one of my favorite things, they hate it, is for the team to actually put together content like a guide when they're going through training, because if they can document something, and we can see, not only can we see if they've understood it, but it's really embedded that learning because they have to apply it. So it's a different way of applying knowledge. And the more times you apply the knowledge, the quicker you build connections with different areas of the brain, and the more likely you are to remember it. So again, it's just about getting your super users and even your day-to-day users enabled on the system, and time it right. So again, just think through the high pressure times of the month or the year and avoid them, because you want the team focused. You want them to be able to really invest in that training. Testing. Planning a testing schedule. So many people go into testing and they don't actually think about how much time they're going to put aside. So and again, like with learning, you want to make sure that you've got regular chunks of time set aside, because then it reinforces. There's actually some science obviously around like how long you should leave it, but basically you want to leave it long enough that it's like not starting to forget. We're actually starting to forget it, but there's still a residue of knowledge, and then redo it. Yeah. So testing almost embeds the training. So plan your testing schedule, set aside a couple of hours, a couple of times a week is normally like what I would recommend as a minimum, and have condensed testing periods, right? 2 weeks is ideal. If you set a 3-month testing window, or even a month, right? What's going to happen is nobody's going to do anything for 3 weeks. And on that last week, they're going to sit there and just go hell for leather, right? But that again isn't great, because they're going to have loads of questions. Whereas constant iterative testing builds knowledge, because they're reinforcing the learning every time they dial on. So every single section is building those pathways and embedding the knowledge of the system. So it's testing is as much about obviously making sure the system's fit for purpose, but it's also about making sure that your team are comfortable. So again, different testing phases. So initial phase, and then like a pause just to address any issues, and then a follow-up phase. A lot of people will also have super users do a set of testing first, get hold of it, get comfortable, and then you roll it out to users. And I actually really like that. So if I have the preference, I like super users to train and test first, and then once we're really comfortable, then we roll it out to the end users if we've got really big sites. So that's something to think about. Have testing scripts. So if you just say to somebody, go and test the system, they'll do one thing and they'll go, yeah, tested, I'm fine, I can enter an invoice, great. That is not testing. Make sure that you have a agreed list, and we provide our customers with testing scripts that we expect them to work through. And we measure and monitor what they do. No, you can sense a theme here. We like to keep an eye on what's happening and make sure that it's successful. So yeah, so making sure you have a list of things that you're going to test. Make sure that list includes all of your different use cases, and make sure it includes reports. Again, one of the areas that people go, oh, I'll test reports after I go live. No, you won't, because then you can't change your configuration to get those reports out, or tweak your data, or check your data. So yeah, you need to make sure that you tested, at least have a dummy data set that you're comfortable with delivering those reports. And testing gives you that data set. So people say, well, I can't test reports because I've not got enough data. Well, use the testing period to get enough data in so you can test, right? So test imports as well as like entering a single invoice. Test an import of invoices. Can you get it in? Yes, great. How does that report? Go through all your use cases. If something major changes, it shouldn't, because you should have got all of that out at your proof of concept stage. But if something major changes, stop, restart the testing from scratch. Yeah, again, you everything is linked. Okay, so if you change something major on your customers or how your invoicing process works, you need to rethink how that's going to impact all of the rest of the pieces. So, for instance, your revenue reporting and your P&L, right? So think about that. Make sure you have a way to track and monitor. Okay, like most systems have a way to see who's logged in to the system and when they did it, when they last logged in. Make sure that you populate testing sheets with yes, this is signed off. Make sure they're logging queries for anything that's not, and give somebody the responsibility of managing that. It needs project managing. Yep. So that's why we like to see people saying yes, yes, yes on the testing sheets. You need to make sure that people have time and that they're actually doing the testing. And again, time it right. This is actually an easier one to flex around people's schedules. At the same time, if somebody's got a major urgent report or a month end to hit, testing doesn't always get the priority that it needs. So you just need to reinforce the value of this, and that it must be done before you go live, and there must be a decent level of testing before you go live. We had a recent case study from the guys at PC24, which you can see on our website or you can see on our social. But they said that the go live, it just felt like nothing. They just went from one system to the other. It felt seamless and easy. And that was because they had done a really great job of testing and getting comfortable with the system before. And that's something we really try and push our customers to do. You should be really comfortable with the system before you go live, right? Going live when you half know a system is just, it's stress that nobody wants or needs, okay? And it's avoidable. So let's make sure that's as positive as possible. It's all down to testing. And it's one of the areas where people think and plan least about. They plan the training, but they really don't think through the testing. Data migration. So data is an area where most people underestimate the time involved. So the one thing I would say to you is assess your data migration requirements very early on. Do a test or a dummy run of data migration. Make sure you know the process to get it from the default, the current system into the new formats and what's required. And make sure you've thought through things like VLOOKUPs if you need to remap things. So common things that come up in implementations are, we're moving from like 5 companies, all with separate sales ledgers, to a shared ledger. So we need to combine accounts, right? So thinking through almost the data changes that you're going to need, do a dummy run where possible, and plan out your checks, controls, and reconciliations. So what are the things that you're going to run, reports, and or just checks on the databases? What are the things you need to spot check to make sure that you're comfortable that you've done a good job of data migration? And the general rule of thumb is that the least amount of touch points, because if you're lucky enough to have an Excel wizard, they'll probably say, I can do I can do 1 billion VLOOKUPs. Absolutely great. But the more touch points, the more different people involved in data migration as well, the more opportunity there is for things to go wrong. So data migration itself needs a sit-down conversation and discussion. Limit the amount of people involved in data migration where possible. Don't try and make it more than one because you've got a single point of failure if somebody's off sick or what have you. But also make sure that you're all talking and you're keeping an eye on what's happening, and that more than one person's doing the data checks and reconciliations is one other tip to think about. Because again, depending on who you've got doing the data, so a lot of people will say, just give it to the admin, and yes, preparing data is an admin task, and if they're detail orientated, brilliant, but sometimes they don't have enough strategic or top level knowledge to understand the data that they're seeing. So something to also consider is, should you have different people involved at this stage, right? So I've just realized I've run through and I've not asked a huge amount of questions. So guys, if you have questions and thoughts on this, then please do jump in. I am trying to keep an eye on all of the conversations we go through, but I've got so much to cover. So if you do have questions or thoughts on anything you've seen, please just ask. It's happy to take live questions. And if you're listening to this on demand, please do send me your questions. Okay, so I'll happily put out my responses on LinkedIn, because if you're asking it or thinking it, someone else will. So my last point of data migration is make sure you have a plan. Make sure you do a test run. Make sure you've scoped it. It's almost like it's a project in itself. Scoped out the requirement, done a test run, and make sure that you've got the right people doing that. And then just find the balance between freeing up resource, using strategic resource, but also having someone that knows your data, knows your system, knows your business well, that can spot, can look at something and go, that doesn't feel right. Okay. So thinking that through is really important. Okay. So go live. Okay. So just a few top tips. Have a pre-go live meeting, internal briefing, and that should also, you should have an internal team one, but also don't forget your stakeholders. You've got those external other systems, other teams. You don't want your managing director sending you 1 billion report requests the day after you go live, right? Because nobody's going to be happy with that, because you're not going to necessarily be in a position to respond as quickly as you'd like, because you're still getting used to the system. So have a pre-go live internal briefing. Think through what are some of the things that could go wrong, what are the risks, how are we going to make sure that we've planned around that. Again, your partner should be taking you through this, but if they're not, think about it. Choose the right time. Again, thinking through, is it year end really the right time? Quarter end better because it's VAT, it's in line with VAT. We don't have to do VAT in different systems, maybe. And setting wider stakeholder expectations. And I'm a big believer in this. There's lots of ways to create capacity for change. So the obvious one is to stop doing something that you're already doing. So that could be backfilling resource, but it could also be lessening the expectation. So sort of saying to your wider stakeholders, so we're not going to have the opportunity to do this. Or asking other teams to step up and manage things like credit control so you can reallocate some of that team. There are different ways depending on the size of organization to create capacity. But when you are creating capacity, making sure that you've got the people that know the business in the decision-making cycle is really important. Don't bring someone from outside in to implement to do the system implementation without your team involved. It very rarely works. Externals can train, support, project manage, guide, but you need people that are actually doing the day job in it. Minimizing the day job, so we talked about that, and ensure super users are easily accessible. So a couple of ways you can do that. So obviously freeing up the capacity is the first thing. Don't give them big jobs the day that you're going live. But secondly, sometimes it offers massive benefits to bring everybody into the office for the first couple of days of go live. The super users can be circulating, people can share things. Oh, have you seen this? Yeah, that's fine. I can do it that way. It just it creates that camaraderie, also great opportunity to, get pizzas for lunch, celebrate success, all that kind of stuff, but also create that real, we're in this together and there's people here to support approach. So something to think about. Not always easy when people are on the other sides of the world, which some of our customers are, but there's ways to do it in remote. So having like team huddles in the morning and in the afternoon, so people have an easily accessible person to go to and ask questions. And of course, using your partners for the technology partners to support that. Absolutely. They can be there to help you with that if you ask. And FAQs. So a couple of questions I always get asked is, should I hire an extra resource? Only if you're backfilling. It's my general rule of thumb. In terms of external resource, project management is sometimes an area where they can really add value, like making sure that internally you're doing those different things. So you've got a testing schedule, etc. But I'm a big believer in that that you should really use your existing team where possible, because they know the processes, and it's more about how you free their time up. So can you bring in some temps to help with the day-to-day processing so they have more capacity? Can you reduce the requirement? How much time? This is very much a piece of string question, and it depends on the scale of the change, the complexity. If you're going into testing, I would say as a minimum, if you're over a 2-week period, you want sort of 2 mornings a week, I would have thought, to test your role. But if you're doing multiple roles, you might need more than that. If you're just doing 1 or 2 functions, you might need less than that. And then you want a couple of weeks or a couple of phases of testing. So testing, how much time do you need to dedicate? Scoping is whatever they say, but don't forget to plan for the research and the thinking phase. Because if taking the time to, as a team, say, what do we want out of this system? Make sure we've got a list and we start to document things. Having those conversations early is really important. What are super users and do we need them? I have used that phrase quite a bit. So super user is somebody that is really comfortable with the system and knows it really well and can normally train and support other people or new people when they join the organization. So and the sorts of people I really like for super users they're the person that knows your current systems inside and out, right? Because they will normally know all of the use cases and the way things can go wrong. So and also, very often they can have a little resistance to change because they at the moment are the people that know everything about the system, and they're going to lose that kind of their perceived or internal value within the organization when they move over. So taking that person and get them to help lead and say, and do that. They tend to be more technically capable. Obviously, the faster they learn new software, the quicker they're going to get to be a valuable super user. Right? They should be people that can coach and mentor, because you're going to have new people that need to do that. They're the sorts of people that can deal when things don't quite work the way that they need to. So the ideal super user is someone that doesn't panic when something doesn't work, that they can go, okay, no problem, I'll deal with that and take it away, and then work with your technical consultants to figure out how that works. So that's kind of what I see a super user as being, and that's the kind of ideal profile. My team don't really want this. Can I train them last? So if you've got to training and you haven't got your team on board, then something really has gone wrong with that change cycle. So I would really genuinely suggest that you take the time to kind of understand that resistance, and or maybe it is time to think about, have you got the right team? If you've got that much resistance, there's two questions: have you got the right team, or have you made the right decision? And perhaps bringing in different people to understand that. But also thinking that very often with the system implementation, there'll be one team that's proportionally more benefited by that change than another. So if you think about AP, AR, nominal, it's why I like you working with, one of the things I like about in tax is I can pull in different partners. So I'll have an AP program that links in and pushes stuff into the nominal. So because every software has its areas of strength, but by having an area of strength, it naturally has an area where it's not as strong. So having systems where you can maybe adapt and develop those capabilities in different areas is really powerful. So where I'm going with this is that obviously you might have some teams that maybe their job won't be as great for a few months while you get in the core system, and then they're going to get their really fancy new shiny AP system, for instance. Just managing that expectation and making sure you're having those conversations for say, look guys, it's going to be a little more challenging for you guys short term, but this is the value that you're going to get once you get out, and make sure they're on board and they understand that, and they're sort of they are in agreement with that as an approach. So yeah, so the question you need to ask, if your team really don't want it, and I'm talking about team, not just one person, if the team really don't want it, you need to understand those concerns, and then you need to get them involved and build that sort of that consensus and make sure they understand the vision of where you're going, and fundamentally get them on that path. Top tips. So think in phases. We talked loads about that. Create capacity for change. Anything you can do to reduce the requirement on finance during a time of change is amazing. So whether that's resourcing, whether that's cutting the expectation, whether that's saying no to things more often than you would do normally, all of those kind of things are really important. And picking the right time. Encourage concerns to be raised, but in a constructive way. Yeah. So what you need to have that conversation, because you need people to speak up when things aren't working in the way that they need to be successful. At the same time, change is hard for humans. We are wired not to like change. Even as change consultants, we don't always like changing our phone to a new one, right? It's hard. There's a discomfort in not knowing what that is. So, you need to make sure that concerns are raised, and having that conversation about how concerns should be raised, trying to have those concerns being raised in one-to-one or less group sessions is always a good kind of rules of engagement piece to have those conversations, or especially when you've got lots of teams and maybe individuals within different teams that are struggling. But as a leader, get hold of them, right? Have those conversations up front, touch base with everybody, right? This is what we're doing. This is a plan. How are we going to approach? Focus on outcomes, not inputs. So a lot of people go into projects really focusing on how do I do my job in this particular way? And that's one of the things you need to get the team involved in making decisions around scope to really think, is to step up and think about the wider process. And they need to think about the outputs. So the reporting capabilities, and the way, and that side of things, not just how do I enter an invoice. Do avoid wherever possible scope creep, but make a note of things that you see. So as you go through, a consultant will hopefully drop like this, it's golden. Oh, we can do that. Make a note of it as you go through working with your consultant, and roll back round, because there is so much that these people don't use the capabilities and the systems that are available. Really making the most and sort of jumping on those opportunities for improvements are really important. Awesome. So any questions from people listening to this live? I'm going to leave a little space, so feel free to pop that in. But today's session, we covered refresher on the change cycle, what does a good implementation look like, and mistakes and top tips for each stage of your implementation. If you have follow-up questions, maybe there's something you want to ask, then DM me via LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to find me. But also email me, hannah.munro@itassolutions.co.uk. Send me a message, ask me a question. If I've got enough questions, I'll do another session. And if it's specific to you, I'll come back to you. But also it's great for me to think through the things that maybe it's a search situation you've not come across before, or maybe you're having a particularly challenging implementation and need some help. I'm always here to offer my thoughts on that. So I love a challenge. So our next session, I did mention this at the beginning, is going to be building a future-proofed reporting architecture. So I'm going to go through the process of how do you scope out reporting requirements, how do you gather and work with stakeholders, some like top tips for doing that, and how do you build it into a future-proofed reporting architecture. And as always, we've got a huge amount of content on our website, www.itas.solutions. Click on resources and financial transformation live. And we have all of the history, right? I actually had to go back. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. We've got so many sessions that I always try to make sure I'm not just repeating stuff. So there's loads of content on there for you to look at. Please do. Love to hear your feedback and see what you think. We've also, if you're looking to do some improvements to your existing systems, we've got how to assess your current finance system. And also, if you're looking for a new system, don't forget we've got our which Sage product is right for you, which talks you through, asks you a load of questions and tells you which ones you should be thinking about and considering. So I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast in live. It's been lovely to speak to you all. If you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear it. And that's all from me today. Thanks for joining and have a fabulous day.